God, I love that story. Love that story. God, I love that story. That is the 12-Bar Blues by W.C. Handy. That's what it is. I don't care what song you've heard it in. I can play it 12,000 different ways. They all suck. It's totally okay if you think so. It's all right. I'm not hurt. I'm not invested that way. It's not about you. It's about me. It's about me dancing with my fingers, dancing with my ears, dancing with my brain, dancing to the 12 The story is how I eventually got laid. I'm not putting words in W.C. Handy's mouth. W.C. Handy didn't write this, he wrote it down. Cartman says, I don't make up the rules, Kyle. I just think them up and write them down. W.C. Handy didn't think up the 12-Bar Blues. The 12-Bar Blues is busker music. It's street music. Guys out on the street 10, 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day, with nothing but beat up pawn shop guitar, maybe if they're lucky, a little milk crate to sit on, a hat in front of them to collect the contributions, the tips. It's not begging. Busking is not begging. Busking is earning a living, and anybody who makes his living as a busker has my license to say that you are earning a living, because you are. You are selling entertainment. You are not begging for charity. But you don't need my license, because the license you have long before mine is from Homer himself, the author of the Iliad, the author of the Odyssey, progenitor of a great many heroic names that you will hear slip from my tongue all the time. But Homer was a busker. Homer, plausibly, we don't know this for a fact, but it's entirely plausible, it is completely in keeping with the times. Homer was blind, and it's completely plausible that he made his living reciting epic poetry in the town square, the cities of the Hellas at that time, wherever it was that he was, plausibly on the Adriatic side of the Hellas, a long, long way from where we think of when we think of Greece, but he was in the position of the storyteller, Baslam the cripple in Heinlein. I forget which book it was. Baslam was a storyteller in exactly this kind of high-energy, pre-Greek high-energy civilization. A civilization that was rich enough to support a storyteller, to support a poet, to support a lyric poet doing lyric poetry with his lyre, very much like black buskers in the South in the United States. Black men who could compose music on the fly based on standard musical tropes that they had memorized. They had memorized them so well they were in their fingers and they didn't do them. But these guys invented the blues, and they invented it who knows how many different ways, who knows how many different variations. And this history of musical competition among musicians, in black music particularly, in blues and in jazz and in rhythm and blues, to some extent in gospel, in a lot of the musical genres in the United States that grew out of the African American experience. There was a real competitive nature in that, and that undoubtedly originated with these buskers competing with each other on the street, trying to pitch a bigger crowd, attract a larger and more prosperous audience that would stay with them longer and tip bigger. This is a very entrepreneurial business. This is very risky. I have played like a busker, but I've never asked for money for it, and that's a level of courage that I maybe don't have. We'll find out. I've written about it, which is often that's enough for me, and that's dangerous, because I think that having that kind of experience of salesmanship would be very good for me. That a lot of the great TV pitchmen were peddlers first, literally selling on the street. And this is hard. I've done this kind of stuff. I've sold on the street, and I've done charity work when I was very young on the street. And I'm good on my feet. I'm good as a stand-up guy. I really should do this. I'm threatening to do it in Tampa anyway when I go. But this story, these black buskers came up with, and W.C. Handy, classically trained, very serious black musician, codified it, rationalized it, turned it into hits. This is in the days prior to recordings. He turned it into hits for bands who would buy sheet music and for player pianos. But he codified this blues in it by taking it and making one single seed out of it, this 12-bar blues. He turned it into a million flowers, and all of the blues, all of jazz, all of rock and roll, all of country. Rhythm and blues. 80% of the popular music of the 20th century is written in this chord structure. This one song over and over again, thousands of songs written this way. And I don't want to attribute the story that I say the blues tells, the 12-bar blues tells the story of how I eventually got laid. I don't want to attribute that to W.C. Handy, because I don't know what he thought, and I don't know what anybody else thought about this either. It's just the story that's in this, and it's definitely, you can tell it's the story that's in this if you listen to the stories that are told with it, because that is always the plot of the story. Whatever else is going on in the story, if it's a true 12-bar blues, it's happy, it's comedy. And it's easy to get confused because a whole lot of blues tropes in general have been used for tragic music, obviously. I want to get rid of both of these terms, comedy and tragedy, because they just confuse the issue. I want to replace them. I've been playing with the ideas of benevolence and malevolence, beneficence. Bene is good in Latin, that's what's coming. Note bene, note well. Goodness, wellness. Bene is literally an adverb, meaning well. But benevolence and malevolence more perfectly describe what I'm interested in. And so I want to change the terms that I'm using. When I use the word comedy, I'm always aware that people are immediately turning to fart jokes or pratfalls or viciousness, malice, satire, ugliness, literally tragedy. That I say comedy, you hear tragedy. I say comedy, you hear tragedy. It's a rap tune. I say comedy, you hear tragedy. Because the forces of evil, the forces of malevolence have basically commandeered comedy in the minds of ordinary people by making tragedy funny, making you laugh at tragedy, which is kind of doubly tragic. But I just want to get rid of the terms entirely because I want to talk about what's really going on in the story. And what's really going on in a story, like right there, that's the turnaround. And everything turned around, and I got laid. You're moving from worse to better. And if I call that comedy and you hear tragedy, tragedy moves from better to worse. So a better word, in my opinion, I'm going to try to introduce new coinages into language. I do it all the time. And who knows, someday it might work. But a better term for the kind of story that I'm interested in would be benedy, emphasizing the benevolence. And a better term for the kind of story that I'm rejecting, the story that moves from better to worse, a better term for that would be malady, E-D-Y, not A-D-Y. Malady with an A is an illness. Malady, like comedy, like tragedy, and also obviously like obscenity. Malady is a story that the action moves from better to worse, regardless of whether or not you laugh at it while it's happening, because your laughter is kind of irrelevant, and your laughter is the inducement of your laughter is kind of underhanded. You are being induced to laugh at your own self-destruction. But the laughter doesn't matter, the jokes don't matter, the supposed humor, the black humor, the anti-humor, the anti-heroes, the anti-everything, it doesn't really matter. If the action moves from better to worse, it's malady. If the action moves from worse to better, it's benedy. And the 12-bar blues, as written by W.C. Handy, is benedy. How I eventually got laid. I started off with the blue balls. It was preying on my mind. Needed to find a woman. I just couldn't make the time. I gave myself a second chance. I found myself a new romance. That's how I eventually got laid. Didn't know anything what to do with the second line in there, but it doesn't really matter, because all it really matters is that's how I eventually got laid. That's the story. It's a beautiful story. It's a wonderful story. I have taken it upon myself to write that story repeatedly. I am producing a series of books, magazetlets, short stories, in my opinion. That's what they really are, short stories, anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 words. I like that length. 3,000 words takes a good reader 20 minutes to read. It's a nice amount of time to spend reading. It's good if you have to take the bus to work. It's good if you have lunch at your desk, but you don't want to spend the lunch at your desk just working, so you read my story for 20 minutes. But I did math for this, and it's not common for me to do math. I am a high D. Most of the people who attend to me are high C's, very computational. The reason for I know that's so is because most of the people who attend to anything of a serious nature on the internet are high C's. That's the way the world works. But I did math on what it must mean. What we're doing, what I'm doing, is a series of short stories about the marriage of Loki and Sigyn. I talked last week about the Norse god Loki, who I really, really identify with. I don't admire everything about the man, but I truly do understand him. I understand what motivated him, why he worked, how he worked, what it was that was important to him. I've been playing with his marriage to Sigyn, his second wife. Sigyn means victory's girlfriend. Victorious girlfriend, literally, but victory's girlfriend. It implies that Sigyn is also victory, the Greek and later Roman god, and that's appealing to me too. She's victory's girlfriend, and she's a goddess of great beauty, great love, and infinite compassion. She becomes like a goddess of intervention, much like the Catholics have saints that they appeal to for particular kinds of intervention. In Norse mythology, Sigyn is very much target of prayers in search of compassion. Very admirable woman. Very admirable. Married to. I'm crazy. But these stories are devoted to just about 2% of their lives together. There are 168 hours in a week, and if we figure that Loki and Sigyn are getting together sexually as a couple. They're making love as often as they can, for as long as they can, as deeply and as passionately as they can, but nevertheless, they're adult human beings with lives. So if they're really doing their best at this, and I can do the math on what the best might look like, I would say that a really happily married couple have hit their stride in their marriage and everything is clicking on all 8 cylinders, everything's really working in their marriage, and they're really making love. When they make love, they're making love probably about 3.5 hours a week. That every other day or so, they're making love for about an hour. So about 3.5 hours a week, which is 1/48 of 168 hours, approximately 2%. They make love for 2% of the time in any given week, and they do something else for the other 98% of the time. And the stories that I'm writing, Loki's love letters to Sigyn. Loki talking about things that he likes to do, that he wants to do, that he has done, that he wishes he had done, that he wants to do next. Talking about that 2% and that 2% only. This is the 2% of a happy marriage that is actively devoted to making love. Is what he's writing about, and the other 98% he's not writing about. And it's interesting to me because unlike Plato, unlike Aristotle, I am not in love with differences. I'm in love with similarities. I'm not in love with the unusual, I'm in love with the common. I'm not in love with the rare, I'm in love with the ubiquitous. I'm not in love with documenting the arcane, but rather with thoroughly understanding the ordinary, the everyday, the way things really work. I believe that the purpose of philosophy is the execution, the proper and flourishing, happy, eudaimonious, splendorous execution of a human life, meaning your one unique, irreplaceable human life. And anything else that you're doing that you dare to call scholarship is just stamp collecting. You are just documenting the trivial, the obvious, and ultimately the inane. They're unbelievably redundant and fundamentally irrelevant no matter what. This is what Plato and Aristotle did to the gift that they inherited from Socrates as they tore it in half and destroyed both halves. This is the rend I am working to repair. And so, focusing on the 2% of Loki and Sigyn's marriage that is concerned with lovemaking, it seems vitally important to me because why? Because the universe is all one thing. Everything is all one thing. And therefore everything ultimately is, in one way or another, a piece of, or a fraction of, or a reflection of everything else. And the 2% of Loki and Sigyn's marriage that you see is the chorus for all of the rest. It's the summary, the concise and perfect summary of everything that's working in their marriage is everything that's working in their love life. And that just seems so remarkably wonderful to me, so much a part of my world, my way of looking at the world, is to take this, to take the absolute best flourishing that either of them experienced, the flourishing that they only experienced together, and to use that as the lens to see the rest of their marriage. To see everything else in their marriage as a reflection of that lovemaking, to say that what they are doing is making love. What they are doing is making love, and they are not making love 2% of the time. They're making love 95% of the time. And I did that math over the weekend and mailed to someone. I pointed out that the way to take the temperature of Loki and Sigyn's love for each other is on a centigrade scale from 0 to 100. They come in at about 95. And the reason for that is that even though Sigyn gives 100% of everything, all of her love to everything that she loves, because she is the goddess of compassion, and the love she gives to Loki is unbelievably total, that Loki is captured and bound like Prometheus. He's bound with the entrails of his own dead son. How horrifying is that? Sigyn's love too. And a serpent is mounted over him that drips poison onto his body, acid, acrid, something that's going to kill him eventually, but will kill him torturously, intense, enduring pain, if any of that poison drips on his body. And to prevent that from happening, Sigyn holds a bowl between the serpent and her husband to save him from this awful fate. And this is perpetual. This is forever. Loki is a captive and a victim, and potentially, ultimately, a homicide victim, ultimately killed by this imprisonment. But Sigyn is a volunteer. She's there by choice. Loki is there because he's compelled to be there, because he's chained. Sigyn is free to leave whenever she wants to, and she never did. What does Storgic love look like? What does it look like? If you find that kind of love, the love like Loki and Sigyn have, then someday one or the other of you is going to be changing diapers, not baby diapers, but adult diapers. Maybe administering intravenous injections, who knows what. But when our health fails us at the end, all we have left is our Storgic relationships. The people who love us most end up doing things that would be deeply degrading and humiliating in any other circumstance. And yet, which of us can offer up that kind of unbelievable expression of that Storgic love, that she would protect her husband from death in perpetuity, that she would live all of her days, all of the days of her life, holding this bowl in agony, a position she could never change, all of it voluntarily. I love that. Sigyn's love was 100%, doubted nothing. So why it is their temperature only come up to 95? Because Loki's love is only 90%. It's true. And the reason for that is because Loki's always looking for the joke. He makes up for it with a 90% commitment to that joke, but they only get to 95. That's the math in Loki's math lab, is that they only get to 95 because Loki's always looking for the joke. But I love these two, and I love the thought of that kind of a marriage where you marry at 20 or 25 and you're together for the next 60 or 70 years. And when you're young, you're pretty, you're both pretty, and you're both really enthralling to each other, and you make lots and lots of love when you're first together, and that's great. But if you're always making love like Loki and Sigyn, then you'll be, even once your marriage hits that groove, it's not a rut, one may hope, but a lot of things that happen the same way every day, every week, every month, because they work. You found things that make things work. And at that point, you need to be thinking about how to keep things interesting, because it's too easy to get into a rut. But if you're really making love like Loki, it's never not going to be interesting, because you're always thinking of new ways of making love wonderful. And so you hit that stride, and you get to that point where you're about 3.5 hours a week, every other day or so, and really investing your time in it from start to finish, from foreplay to snuggling, an hour or more. 3.5 times a week. 3 times a week, 4 times a week, on average 3.5 times a week. 60 years. 70,000 hours. 75,000 hours. author of useless tomes that I don't read. I don't think I've ever read a word written by Malcolm Gladwell, but I hear the titles of his books because his books sell really well. My take is that if I hear a title of the book that I think, duh, I got it, you just saved me 6 hours or so. I don't have to read your 60,000 word book. I already got it. One of his books is The Tipping Point, and if you can't figure out what the tipping point means from that title, you're done. If you have to have 6 elaborated examples of what tipping points look like, then Malcolm Gladwell is your guy. But another book that he wrote, and I don't even remember what this one was called, but it made the argument, an argument that I've heard since I was a kid, is that if you give anything 10,000 hours, you'll be great at it. It's a sports analogy, a sports argument. That's where I first heard it, is in terrible 16mm films that they would show us so the teacher wouldn't have to work when we were in public school. And some, Terry Bradshaw type, it wasn't Terry Bradshaw because he was too young, but some Terry Bradshaw type making that argument. Anything you do, if you give it 10,000 hours, I will point out to you that if you are a man and you're older than the age of, say, 18, then you are a world-class professional masturbator. You are unequaled. I mean, you are Olympic quality. If this argument is true, 10,000 hours, of course it isn't true. It's stupid. What is the 10,000 hours argument? The 10,000 hours argument is the labor theory of value from our buddy Karl Marx. If a given mud pie is worth a certain value, then a mud pie that you spend an extra 10,000 hours working on is worth 10,000 times as much. Okay, mud pies have no intrinsic value, so obviously that argument is speechless. So let's go with a gold ring instead. That if you can make a gold ring that has a decent market value, if you can, do everything necessary to strike and decorate that ring in an hour and get paid profitably for your efforts, at the cost plus your time, materials, effort, cost of doing business, marketing expenses, all of the expenses that go into running your business, nevertheless you show a profit on that after an hour's work. Fully for you. Make another one. But if instead you spend 10,000 hours making the next one and expect to earn even 1 cent more, I mean, you may add value, so we may collect a lot more. You may collect double. If you expect to collect 10,000 times more because you put 10,000 hours into that ring, and if we go from mud pies to real pie, I can make a pie in an hour, and it's a big pie with flaky crust. My mother used to hate it. She was so jealous of me because my crust was so much flakier than hers. You can make a pie in an hour. You make a pie, take 10,000 hours to make a pie, you will have ruined that pie. You will have destroyed your life, but you'll have ruined that pie. You cannot make a pie that's worth eating in 10,000 hours. Have a 100-year egg, I suppose, or a 1,000-year egg. A 10,000-year pie is probably not worth eating. It's a labor theory of value. It's a completely stupid argument that time is a false proxy in this case. It's a false proxy of a cargo cult, but the labor theory of value is a false proxy of a cargo cult. All of Marxism is a cargo cult built on false proxies like that, and I don't think that Marx was fooled by any of them. I think he understood exactly what he was doing. He was inventing all of these false proxies for dumbasses to repeat. It was a brilliant feat of demagoguery, maybe the most perfect feat of demagoguery in the history of demagogues is the career of Karl Marx. But nevertheless, if you make love like Loki and Sigyn, you and your wife will make 70,000 hours, 75,000 hours of love in your marriage. You will be 7 times an Olympic quality expert at lovemaking, and this is a case where really, frankly, if you do invest the effort, you can get a lot better, and there is no Olympic competition. There is no competition at all. One of the things a book I've never written, and I undoubtedly never will write now, was about turning a manifestation, a piece of lovemaking into a competitive event for men, because men will turn anything into a competitive sport. This is something that should not be turned into a sport, and where you see sport-like behavior associated with it, what you're seeing has nothing to do with lovemaking. It may well be veiled homosexuality among men who can't dare to measure their dicks side by side, but it doesn't have anything to do with lovemaking, because lovemaking is private. Lovemaking is completely private. There cannot be any sort of public lovemaking other than in the form of art, because lovemaking is completely private consecration. But I love this math. It's alien to me to do math on anything, but I just love it. I think it's so amazing. 75,000 hours in each other's arms. That's what you can do over the course of a marriage. Then in addition to all the other values that you manage to pile up, the beautiful home you live in, the wonderful children you raise together, the grandchildren they bring by, the grandchildren who stay for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe the whole summer. But the only people who can get this, the only people who can have this, are the ones who stay together. Whatever it is that you think you might get that's better than what you have right now, you can't have this victory condition. You can't have the grandchildren that you got from Victory's girlfriend without showing her at least 90% of the loyalty that she shows you all the time. My name is Swann. This is the Church of Splendor. And the splendor you get here is the food of life. Bless you. Thank you. See you next week.